Welcome to Informatica University Success Academy. Cloud Application Integration, Process Designer Overview. In this video, you will learn how to use the Process Designer to integrate applications in the cloud. The Process Designer is a suite of tools for building cloud-based processes. These processes can either be interactive or standalone. The processes you create reside and run within the Informatica cloud or run on the Informatica Secure Agent. While they reside in the Informatica cloud, they can interact with the applications that are accessible on the internet. These applications present themselves either as services or APIs. They also can be applications that use licensed Informatica connectors. To design a process, you need to perform the following in sequential order. Create a process, set process properties, optionally set process object properties, add process steps, and handle faults if any. Let us create a process. Log into Informatica Cloud Application Integration, click New, select Processes, Process, and click Create. The Process Designer opens where you can implement your business logic. You will see a stub of this flow with the start step representing the beginning of the flow. The end step marks the completion of the flow. You can add steps or activities to perform a specific task on this path. You can do this by dragging and dropping the step into the designer canvas. Alternatively, you can double-click the link and select a step type from the drop-down list. You can perform multiple operations using the toolbar options like copy and paste, cut and paste to a different place, delete, undo to reverse an effect, redo to undo the last undo operation. First, to move the selection to the start step, zoom in and zoom out, or find to search for a specific step. You can click the validation icon to see any validation errors that may have resulted from the steps. The validation panel lists the steps that have validation errors. You can see further details and identify the reason for the error. There are 3 window control buttons available: Maximize, Minimize, and Restore. You can maximize a properties window, minimize to see only the design canvas, or restore to see both the design canvas and the properties window. Click Save to save all changes. Click the action icon to publish, unpublish, or open properties details. Click Close to close the process design. Let's explore each step. The first step is the start step. In this step, you will configure the properties for a process. The General tab gives information of the process like name of the process, location where it resides, and a brief description. In the Start tab, binding indicates the type of protocol, for example, REST or SOAP, or an event. Allowed groups and allowed users indicate the groups and users that have access to the process service URL at runtime. This is to ensure that there is no unauthenticated access to a process that is intended to be secured for usage. When you select the Allow Anonymous Access checkbox, the Process Designer lets anyone use this process. This means that the access to this process is not tied to a specific group or user. If you enter values for allowed groups and allowed users and then select Allow Anonymous Access, the values for allowed groups and allowed users will be cleared off. If you do not enter a role in the allowed groups or allowed users field, or select allow anonymous access, then there will be no service URL available for this process. You can, however, call this process as a sub-process. Applies to indicates the type of object associated with the process. The objects listed here are the process objects you define separately or that are generated in a defined connection. Retain the default option Any if you do not want to associate the process with a specific object. Run on indicates where the process will run, cloud server or a specific agent. Run as is specific to Salesforce. It indicates whether to run the process as the current user or system. In the Input Fields tab, you can define the input parameters with which the process is invoked. These input parameters are either passed as URL parameters for a HTTP or SOAP-based process, or added as a part of an event. For example, a delimited file event will automatically add delimited content as input to this process. This object indicates the file content. For this demonstration, we'll reset values to HTTP SOAP and add input fields. By default, the input format selected is fields. If you select whole payload, then the input field represents the entire content of the request. To add an input field, click the Add icon. Enter a name, the data type, and a brief description. The required field, if selected, indicates that the field is required for the process to execute. Similarly, we have added another input field of type text. The Output Fields tab allows you to define the output parameters which the process returns after execution. As stated in the input fields, the output format can be fields or whole payload. Click the Add icon to add an output field. Enter a name, the data type, a brief description, and an initial value. The initial value is displayed as a process output if this field is not assigned any value in the process. Similarly, we have added another output field of type text. The Temp Fields tab allows you to define the temporary parameters which the process will use during execution. To add a temp field, click the Add icon, enter a name, the data type, a brief description, and an initial value. In the Messages tab, you can define one or more message events for this process. Message events lets you define APIs that this process can listen to. This allows message events to communicate with the process using the correlation ID. For each message, you can define input and output fields. In the Advanced tab, Suspend on Fault, when selected, suspends the process when an uncaught fault occurs. You can then resume, stop, or fail a suspended process from Application Integration Console. Select a tracing level from the list to determine the corresponding persistence and logging level settings. These are the various options available. None, Terse shows only false, Normal shows execution with service data, Verbose shows execution with data. Use the Notes tab to add information that you or other developers may need. The notes you enter is displayed only during the design. The process users or consumers do not see the notes. A service step is used when you want to connect to a third-party system which is exposed either as a connection, process, or a system service. In the Service Properties section, enter a name for the step in the General tab. In the Service tab, service type can be a connection, a process, or a system service. Based on the selection, the corresponding input fields will be populated. For example, if you select connection, you must specify the connection from the drop-down list. Select the action from the drop-down list. Notice the description, input, and output for the service. The Input Fields tab shows names of the input fields. You can add input fields using the Add Field button. You can assign value to this field as content, query, formula, or another field. Fault handling lets you handle faults for a service step, if any. If you select Catch Faults, you are presented with an option on how to handle it. Use the Timer Events tab to perform an action based on a schedule. Specify messages for use with message providers and correlation. You can use a parallel path step to execute two or more activities or steps concurrently. In the Parallel Paths Properties section, enter a name in the General tab. In the Parallel Paths tab, enter the paths you want the process to run in parallel. For this demo, we have a create step and a sub-process step to run in parallel. You can add more parallel paths. To add a parallel path, click the Add icon. To delete, click the Delete icon. The Create step is used to add new object instances. For example, if you work with a Salesforce connection, you can create Salesforce objects like account. If you're working with a JDBC connection, you can insert a row in the database table. In the Create Properties section, enter a name in the General tab. In the Create tab, you can select the connection and object from the drop-down list. In the Input Fields tab, you can define the input fields that you wish to add to the object. In the second path, we'll add a sub-process step. A sub-process embeds one process within another process. When you execute a sub-process, the embedded process is also executed. In the Sub-Process Properties section, enter a name for the sub-process in the General tab. In the Process tab, you can specify the details of the embedded process. For this demo, we'll select a process named WriteToFile. You can define the input and output fields, if any, based on the embedded process. In the Iteration Rule tab, you can define the number of times you want to invoke the sub-process. In the Input Fields tab, you can enter input values for this process. Fault handling, timer events, and message events are same as the service step. Now, if you go back to the staging step and check the paths, it will show you the steps that you defined for these paths. We'll now add an assignment step. The assignment step is used to set value to a field. In the Assignment Properties section, enter a name for the step in the General tab. In the Assignments tab, click Add Field to assign name and source values. We'll add a milestone step after the assignment step. A milestone step is used to send synchronous response back to the user while the process continues execution. In the Milestone Properties section, enter a name in the General tab. In the Milestone tab, you can perform two actions. Send synchronous response to the original request, which has all the output fields defined in the process properties, or end of process, where no further action occurs when the process ends. The HTTP status indicates the response status, which is sent back to the user. We'll add a wait step after the parallel path. You can use a wait step to suspend process execution for a specific period. In the Wait Properties section, enter a name in the General tab. In the Wait tab, you can define properties that determine when and how long the process pauses. Enter the wait period to pause the process. We'll now add a jump step. You can add a jump step to jump to a specific step. Specify a target of the jump. You can select from the drop-down list. The jump step has the following restrictions when used in conjunction with the parallel path step. You cannot jump to any branch of the parallel path step from outside the parallel path step. You cannot jump to any step outside a parallel path step from the parallel path step. However, you can jump from one branch of a parallel path step to another branch. We'll add a decision step after the wait step. A decision step allows a process to take different paths depending on the value of the field. In the Decisions Properties section, enter a name in the General tab. In the Decision tab, you can define the fields and paths. The process takes a decision based on fields and paths you define here. Select a field name from the list of fields you define under Start Fields. Enter conditions and values that you want the decision step to base a decision on. The conditions depend on the field you select. In this example, for the field sum, the conditions displayed here are available. You can enter text values against the condition you select. You can add multiple conditions. Each condition is a potential data path. For each path that you add, a corresponding branch appears on the UI. The otherwise path handles execution if the data does not meet the condition. An important point you must note with the decision step is that the process evaluates conditions in top-down order. Ensure that the otherwise path is the last path. We'll add an assignment step on the equals branch. This step will be used to assign output field status value to suggest that one of the inputs to this process is 0. We'll add an end step for the otherwise branch. An end step indicates the end of the process. The process completes when execution reaches this step. In the End Properties section, enter a name in the General tab. In the End tab, the ending type is set to End of Process by default. Select the HTTP status from the list. The default value is 200 OK. We'll now add a Receive step. To add a Receive step, we must first define message events in the Start tab. To add a message event, click the Add icon. Enter a name for the message event. Select Allow Anonymous Access. Add input and output fields as shown here. Enter input fields and specify them as required and needed for correlation. Enter the output fields. A receive step can be defined in a process that creates a service and waits for some event data before the process can continue. For example, if you want to pause the processing before user explicitly requests to continue through an API call, you may use the receive step to do so. In the Receive Properties panel, enter a name in the General tab. In the Receive tab, Message indicates the message event. For correlation, enter fields you are correlating with the incoming message event. You can use a throw step to construct an error payload. In the Throw Properties section, enter a name in the General tab. In the Fault Fields tab, code is a string value that contains the name of the fault info payload. Detail is a string value that contains the fault info detail. And reason is the reason for the fault. We have now completed the design. We must publish this process to expose it as an API. Let's see if the design is valid. Click the validation icon to see the validation panel. As you see here, there are issues with the create step, write to DB. Let's fix this error. Select the step and edit the properties. The error occurred because we missed to enter the connection details for the step. Let's add them now. You will see that there are no more validation errors. Open the Actions menu to publish the process. Publish the process. The process is published successfully, and you can now see the Unpublish option available. Click Properties Details. You will see the process properties and the service endpoint URL. The service endpoint URL is required to call the process as an API along with the API definition available as Swagger and WSDL. For more information on cloud application integration, click the Help icon to access resources available in various formats like online help, videos, walkthrough guides, and so on. This concludes the demonstration on Process Designer overview. We hope this tutorial helped you learn some basic concepts on how to use a process designer and perform various activities in the canvas. We hope you will apply this learning to create simple and complex business flows.